Time to abandon ship.
Oh no!
Here we go.
Can I persuade you to join us for a drink? It's a tradition.
Here, here.
Jar Jar, homie, my main man, quickly. Before the Separatists attack, get into the escape pod.
Hey! This is escape, then we're the pod.
Welcome back to Star Wars Escape Pod. I'm your host, Josh, and Blake, our co-host, is waiting in the Escape Pod to chat all about Star Wars The High Republic, A Test of Courage, a book by Justina Ireland, which launched January 5th, 2021, and it is preceded by Light of the Jedi, which is the last book discussion that we did. We've been reading these High Republic books to try and stay on top of the curve of all this new story development that's happening within the Star Wars saga, and of course we're going to be getting into this next chapter of the Star Wars story called A Test of Courage. So stay tuned for this spoiler-centric discussion.
Another happy landing.
Hello there. Hey man, good to be back.
Good to have you back. As always, we have another Star Wars book. One of. I posted a tweet the other day.
A lot coming out right now.
A lot coming out. I posted a tweet on the podcast Twitter the other day, and it was in response to one that Kobo had sent out saying, if you could only read one genre of book or something for the rest of your life, which one would it be? And I said Star Wars, because there's enough books in the category that it could qualify as a genre.
Yeah, honestly, at this point, yeah, you're not wrong there. There's a lot of books.
There's so many, dude. There's in the expanded universe in general, I believe there's close to 300 novels. And that's including the younger reader ones. You know, that's everything from junior to young adult to
EU.
That's all the EU stuff. Only the EU stuff. That's just Star Wars Legends, non-canon material.
That's nuts.
With
and
canon
Bryce has read them all.
Oh,
no, I'm not sure if he has.
We make jokes that he's read them all, but no, he's read a good chunk though. He's read a lot more than I have.
He's at least gone on the wikis and read everything that happened, or at least seems to have. He just like name drop some obscure thing, and he's like, "Oh yeah, it's that thing from this place." Like,
right?
How do you know that?
His vast EU knowledge is still not enough to compete with my ultimate trivia that I made for the 100th victory celebration episode.
It was all Clone Wars, man. That's like his weak spot.
That was his weak spot for sure. But yeah, I mean, out of all the questions I made, though, he did actually know a fair few of those
obscure
legends.
Ones.
Those legends questions.
That's a strong point for sure.
Yeah, today that would get a lot of people because any new Star Wars fans, getting into Star Wars, a lot of the new books for the last 5-6 years have all been canon, right? So they've been diverging away from most of that source material that.
Well, it's funny because like at the same time, they're also slowly taking stuff out and bringing it back in. So it almost gives us old school fans a little bit of, like, I guess, stuff to share. Like, oh, look, this is that thing from that obscure piece of Star Wars material that happened 20 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. It's quite funny actually. Like the interview where Kathleen Kennedy kind of there's a lot of people mad about this, where she said something along the lines of how we have nothing to like base our stories on. Or you remember that?
I remember this. Yeah.
Right. I forget the exact words.
And people were like, what are you talking about? There's like thousands and thousands of hours of material.
Yeah, there's like.
He's like, but none of it is good.
None of it's good. None of it competes with the greatness of Brian Johnston.
There's a reason why we scrapped it all. It was awful. Man, honestly, what they should do is they should just get Timothy Zahn to just write the outline for all of their stories, and everything will be way better.
Right. Although speaking of Timothy Zahn, though, you aren't overly the biggest fan of the newer Thrawn books, though. You've read two of them, I think, right?
To me, it's kind of hard just because I like the old version of Thrawn so much. and it feels not quite the same, and it kind of bothers me. So I've had a hard time getting into it. It almost feels like a clinical version of him.
Right.
That's more or less the only reason. And I just kind of tapered off all the books for a while there. If I were to pick up where I was, I would definitely be reading the Thrawn books, though. I think I read like 1 or 1.5. I own the second one hardcover, but I haven't read it yet.
Yeah, I've read the first 2 out of the original trilogy, the third one being Thrawn Treason, and never made my way to that. But that one did not get the best reviews, surprisingly enough. However, his new trilogy that he's making, the Thrawn Ascendancy trilogy, which is a prequel trilogy to the ones that we've read, those ones have been doing pretty well. Like I've heard great things about, I've heard great things about Chaos Rising and stuff. But because it's a prequel trilogy to this trilogy I haven't finished yet with Thrawn Treason, I still want to read that book, even though the reviews are not overly the best. I still want to get through it just to say I finished. I got to finish the trilogy. Just like Aftermath, it was a hard pill to swallow, but not that this one's a bad series, but I know what you're talking about. It's not as good as you would expect.
Yeah, and I think honestly, now I'm thinking about it a bit more. I think the reason that is when Zahn had originally created the character. No, not only was it fresh, but he was kind of doing his own thing. And now it's like, okay, here's a contract. You need to write X number of books. Just do it. And then it feels a little forced. You know what I mean?
Oh, so you're saying that within the bounds of the canon, he's a bit confined to flex his freedom with the character, so to speak? Is that what you're saying?
No, it just feels a little rushed. Like, okay, all right. It's not about a story anymore. It's about getting X number of books.
Yeah, in a way, it does feel that way. I mean, it makes me wonder how much some of these authors get paid for the work that they do with.
Well, we know books. If they're Canadian, they get to double dip.
Right. They get the library tax credit.
That's right.
From all us Canadians actually using libraries, which.
There's actually a surprising amount of people, at least like in Vancouver.
Anyway. Use a library?
Yeah, like the big one downtown. Anyway.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's true enough. So we got A Test of Courage with Justina Ireland. It's 200 pages long or so, 204 with the epilogue.
I had no idea how many pages there were because when I was using the Kobo app, I scaled it in. So the page numbers are all obscure.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. So did you make your way through the whole thing?
I did. I managed to get all the way to the end of the epilogue tonight. I'm also ashamed to say that I did not read the section at the end of the book about the author. I happened to skip that. So if you have any trivia questions on that, I'm sorry, man. It's going to be above me.
Right. That's fair. Well, there's not much on that page anyway, so I think we're good. But I know in general, I don't want to go into as thorough detail as Light of the Jedi and stuff. We'll keep this
we basically spark noted the whole book.
Yeah, we basically did. Yeah, in an audible form. So if any of you guys listening did enjoy Light of the Jedi, let us know. And if you didn't, let us know. It's
the
still
whole book. There's nothing left to be revealed. We basically went chapter to chapter.
We went full spoiler. We went full spoiler mode and didn't leave anything out. And that was more or less an intention of mine in a way, but at the same time, because I thought, oh, you know what, this episode, it might be good for anyone who's not interested in reading the book, but just hearing about the book, right? With a book like this, it's a junior novel and not overly essential to the overall narrative that's happening. It's kind of a supplement book that works its way into that main story. And so I figured, let's just chat about the general plot, some of the characters, anything that we picked out, and just kind of how it works its way into the bigger narrative. And
you can really see that by the end of the book when some of the other more prominent characters from the first novel start to show up.
Right. Yeah. So just starting with the plot, it might be a good space to just read the publisher's summary or sorry, the plot summary here. All right. So on a mission of sabotage, undercover Nile pirates Clinith Da and Guishi land land their stolen cargo hauler at Port Hellleap. Oh my goodness, all these alien words to me. The Galactic Republic is looking to expand into the Dalnan sector, which the Nile do not want to happen, and so the duo have been sent to destroy the Republic starship Steadywing as it leaves Hellleap. Since someone important to the Republic is supposed to be on board, Clinith, a human, is uncomfortable with at least some of her piercings in, deciding to put her silver lip... What the heck? I think someone's edited this page. I'm reading off the Wikipedia page. What the heck? What? Okay, you know what? Never mind. I'm just gonna. You know what? I'm just gonna. Cut this whole
Hold on.
part out.
That was beautiful. That was beautiful. I think you should clip that and send it to Audible as an application to read for them.
I'll read the published summary instead. All right, it's like 2 paragraphs here. All right. Long before the Clone Wars, the Empire, or the First Order, the Jedi lit the way in the galaxy in the Golden Age known as the High Republic. Vernestra Rwoh has become a Jedi Knight at the age of 15, but her first real assignment feels a lot like babysitting. She's been charged with supervising 11-year-old and aspiring inventor Avon Starros on a cruiser headed into the dedication of the wondrous new space station called the Starlight Beacon. But soon on their journey, bombs go off aboard their cruiser while the adult Jedi try to save the ship. Vernestra, Avon, and Avon's droid J6, a Jedi Padawan, and an ambassador's son make their way to an escape shuttle. But communications are out and supplies are low. They decide to land on a nearby moon, which offers shelter, but not much more. And unbeknownst to them, danger lurks in the forest. So along with those dangers come the Nile, which are hunting down these survivors of the escape pod.
For the Nile!
For the Nile! For the eye!
Storm is upon us.
Oh, man. Light of the Jedi references, everybody. So yeah, it's interesting, seeing these kids of various ages and stuff. 15 for Jedi Knight, that's
very young, but they also make a point of noting that specifically, and that may be young for the time. I bet there were Jedi being knighted during the Clone Wars early, right? With what do they call it, battle promotion, some of that.
Yeah, I remember one episode of the Clone Wars where it was Kit Fisto's Padawan who was knighted, and he got killed by Grievous so fast.
Kit Fisto.
Kit Fisto. The big Jamaican smile.
Yeah, I like that guy a lot. Actually, Bryce says his lightsaber. Yeah.
Yes, he does. Yeah, it's a pretty cool one to have, actually. But yeah, he gets killed pretty quickly in the Clone Wars, and so he's got a huge amount of overconfidence. But in terms of it's Vernestra, right? She's the Jedi Knight.
Yeah, that's right.
So her thing that she struggles with is that she kind of doubts herself a little bit. She's really I don't know. She doesn't feel overly, would you say she doesn't feel ready for tasks as a Jedi Knight? Not
compared to the other Jedi. Emery is definitely a lot more self-conscious and nervous. She, I think, is actually more a struggle of kind of being overbearing on people. Yeah. Like, people feel she's kind of judgmental, I guess.
Yeah.
That being said, the characters that feel that way are usually the ones that are, up to no good.
Yeah.
So
there's out of all the characters, I think they all have, and hence the title of the book, Test of Courage. They all kind of have their thing going on that they're struggling with, like as they undergo these stressful circumstances of surviving this ship crash or the escape pod crash and the events that they witnessed on board the geez, I'm forgetting the name of the ship now. You know what I'm talking about, right? So
the first one at the beginning.
The name of the ship. Yeah, what was the name of the ship again?
I'd have to look it up. They haven't mentioned it very often since it blew up.
Yeah. So since the since the ship blew up,
the Steadywing.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, the Steadywing. So since the ship blew up, I mean, whose master was it that died? Was it Vernestra's?
It was
Vernestra's. Imri's master, right?
Imri's master, yeah.
She's really struggling with.
His name was Douglas. It's such a very normal name. All these crazy Star Wars names that you can't pronounce, and then
Doug,
and then yeah, exactly. Jedi Master Doug.
So good.
I remember his name more than anybody else. I love it.
He's just like this hick kind of guy, you know.
Yeah, he was too. He doesn't like wearing robes or anything. He basically dresses like Luke. He dresses like Luke.
Right.
Yeah, like
just
workers'
like
clothes and boots. Looks like a farmer.
Yeah. I it makes me wonder what kind of person in Justina, Ireland's life that he was based on. It definitely gives me a chuckle, Doug. But yeah,
it's probably her uncle or whatever.
It also reminds me of I think there's a Marvel character named was it Doug? I think it was the little.
There's an alien species named Doug.
That is also true.
Maybe it used to be Doug, and then she was like, "Oh no, everyone's gonna think he's a Doug," so she added Douglas.
Yeah, so Doug, he was that little alien creature, or in Thor Ragnarok that's dead.
Yeah.
And when Thor gets to that battle arena, the big rock guy is like, "All right, new Doug,"
Replaces him.
Yeah, replaces the Doug who is always optimistic about leaving or whatever. I don't know.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah, so the characters all have their own challenge that they're facing and everything, and
they're actually really unique. That was one thing I did enjoy, was each character did feel like they're its own unique storyline going on. Yeah. There's actually more depth than I would have expected in characters for a junior novel.
Right. And that's kind of the one thing I really wanted to get to, is like the fact that it's a junior novel. Really, it's not meant as a label to deteriorate anyone from wanting to read this book. Like yes, it's more junior friendly. Is it something that's going to take away from the reading experience of a Star Wars story in general? Like, I don't think so. Like it's a Star Wars story either way, and it's not overly childish. Like,
yeah,
I feel like it was pretty good.
And fair warning, it gets better in the second half.
Yeah.
The first half I didn't feel was written very well, to be honest. And then it got better.
It was a slow setup. It was a slow setup for a short book.
It was a very slow setup, and I actually found it a little deceiving. I didn't read the back page. So the first how many chapters are about the Nihil. And so I thought the whole book was going to be about the Nihil. And then all of a sudden it just stopped and went on to the four main characters. And you never see them again to the end. And I just kept waiting every chapter to read more about the Nihil, because I care about them more because they're more interesting. And they never showed up until the climax.
Yeah. Well, they did get the epilogue, so that's all right.
That's true.
But, so one thing to note about this story is that the plot overlaps the events of Light of the Jedi. So
slightly.
Slightly, yeah. So in the Light of the Jedi, we start prior to the launch of Starlight Beacon, and at the end of the novel, Starlight Beacon is launched. Right, that's the official day of recognition for all the Jedi. Same with the Marvel comics.
What do they call it? Life Day.
Life Day. I forget the official title, but there was a specific name that they called it, and it was a dedication. I think it was dedication day for all the Jedi who were going to be knighted, and it was going to be aboard the Starlight Beacon, right? And that's something that we visually saw in the Marvel comic.
That's why they all stand up at the end and raise their lightsabers.
Yes, that's right, exactly. So this entire book takes place before that, I'm pretty sure, right? Because at the very end of the book, they're talking about the what's her face, or Vernestra taking on the younger Jedi as a Padawan.
Yeah,
and it hasn't happened yet. Like Master Skier makes an appearance in this book, and so I think it's either it ends shortly before or shortly after the Starlight Beacon is launched, but I'm pretty sure it was before. Okay,
but yeah, I might have missed the time framing then. I had just naturally assumed it was afterwards.
Right, being the second book we read, it would feel that way, I guess. But the beginning of the book, that's one of the things in the background of the plot is like, this is yet to happen, and this is one of the other stories happening before this whole this whole dedication happens, but the great disaster has already happened.
Yeah, because it seems like they're talking about having to go slowly through space because they can't at the beginning, and towards the end they're willing to risk a few jumps because it's mostly over. So it probably does line up with the tail end. Then I would think.
I think what happens is this whole book is kind of wedged between the first part and the third part of Light of the Jedi. I think this whole story kind of slots in there somewhere, because at the very, very end of the book, because Cassiv, who is a big player in the Nile, is dead in Light of the Jedi at the very, very end. Spoilers for anyone who didn't listen to our spoiler-centric review.
Put a warning in front of that.
It's, well, this I'm gonna be putting it in the description too, but I did mention earlier. So Cassiv, who's a big player in the Nihil, he's referenced in this novel a few times because one of his strikes are the Nihil people that are actually coming after these Jedi, right, that have crashed on this planet, these younger Jedi. So they reference Cassiv as if he's still alive, which gives me the indication that his entire book takes place before he dies in the third section of Light of the Jedi.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because he dies in that big battle, right?
I saw the name in the book and I paused on it. I'm like, I feel like I should know this person. Right. I just carry it on.
So that was one of the things that stuck out to me. And there's actually one piece at the very, very end of the epilogue, the last page, one of the Nihil people talking about, reminiscing to herself, that she would show the Republic and the Jedi just what the Nihil were capable of. Cassiv and the other Tempest runners would be proud. And when she was done, the Dalnan sector would be nothing but ashes. So that's one of the couple sentences from the book there. So at this point, the book is now over. And I believe Cassiv is probably, maybe she just doesn't know he's dead yet, but I would assume that the end of this book ends around the same time that Light of the Jedi ends. So they kind of overlap directly.
At the very end, we're already jumping towards the end now, but the epilogue, they talk about, it's from their perspective, and I forget the name of the character. She's only in that one section. She's a Quarren storm leader, or whatever they're called, and she talks about she had to send a bunch of her strikes to go help with whatever thing. I think the first thing I thought of in my head was that giant battle where the eye manipulates everything in hyperspace and basically just kills everybody. So I assume it was that, but I didn't see any specific name reference.
Her name's Kara Sue with an XOO. Is the Quarren that you're talking about? It's interesting how this story kind of overlaps the events of Light of the Jedi, but it's not a junior adaptation of Light of the Jedi. It's a different story that takes place in this frame of time.
This is already it's kind of annoying how the canon is all in this time era is already starting off in this really confusing way. And seeing the comics are all overlapping too. So it's just gonna be hard to keep everything separate.
I think going forward it's gonna be a little easier, just because there is this great disaster that started. They're trying to find this common ground of a beginning point for all these story mediums, and then they're gonna kind of go off in their own branches and all overlap somewhere. But I found it interesting that this book literally overlaps Light of the Jedi, and I think the next one that they make, which is going to be what did I say it was going to be called, The Race to Crash Point Tower, which is going to be written by Daniel Jose Older, is the next junior novel in the High Republic series. And I think that's going to be more or less a direct sort of continuation of this junior novel series in a way. And we might see a lot of the same, maybe some similar. Yeah, some of the characters might pop up again. I don't know exactly, but it's a possibility.
They had kind of built it up in a way that I felt like we're going to see the characters again, at least the two Jedi and the mechanic girl. We haven't really talked about yet. So one of the main four characters, we should probably just describe all of them. So we talked a little bit about Fernestra, which was more or less the main Jedi. She's the knight and kind of takes charge of the whole thing. She's a newly knighted Jedi, as we had discussed. And she she's really coming into her own as a knight. She was expecting to give a lot more freedom, but she's realizing that there's still a lot of duties that are involved in being a knight, and just trying to figure out her own path. Imri is the second Jedi we meet. He has his Jedi master is coming along with him at the start of the novel, and he's really self-conscious and he's not sure if he really belongs to be in the Jedi Order. He just feels that he's not strong enough in the Force, and is constantly worried that he's not going to live up to expectations. And his story arc kind of revolves around that and the loss of his master and his pet monkey, which was like the best part of the novel. His little monkeys called Handsies. They have 6 arms.
He's got a thing with his lightsaber too.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. So this is adding to his self-consciousness, where he hasn't actually completed creating his lightsaber entirely. It functions, but it actually flickers a lot, and it isn't a full strength lightsaber. And so all these things are weighing down on him, making him just very self-conscious of being a Jedi at all.
Yeah, so that's kind of reflected in the creation of his lightsaber, which is, the weapon and the tool of a Jedi. And I like how the inconsistency of the blade and the almost the fragile nature of it kind of reflects his stature in the Jedi as well, with his own abilities. So. Yeah,
that's so true. He's actually very mirror to Vernestra. It's funny, she's very confident, and not only does she have a regular lightsaber, but the Force, quote unquote, guided her to actually modify her lightsaber into a light whip. So she has like a switch that switches her lightsaber from a blade to a whip.
Right. Actually, I wrote that down, and I've got very few annotations here, so I'm gonna run through them all, and we should
finish the other 2 characters before we move on.
Right? Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
So who's next?
Next, we'll talk about, I guess, Honesty, which is the son of the diplomat of the planet of the ship that we're following. If you can follow that description. And he doesn't feel he's a very good diplomat and doesn't fit in with his family. Typical rich kid story.
Yeah.
And he wants to be a military medic, like a field medic. So he's been training to do that, but he also is lacking in confidence. Seems to be a common theme for the male characters here, except for Master Doug, who probably is the bravest character of the entire novel. Deserves his own comic line.
I can just imagine Doug with like this New Zealand accent, like super laid back, kind of farmer, like.
Yeah, that's about right. Yeah. New Zealand accent.
It comes from
he have like a southern accent?
I don't know. It comes from the Thor Ragnarok reference.
That's what you're thinking.
Oh yeah, my name's Doug. Just laid back and know everything.
I'm picturing that guy from, like, the voice of the guy from the bus at Disney. Yeah, we're just got to head over there.
Well, that'll be right there.
Yeah, there's the bus you want right there. Well, that's too bad.
That's too bad. Yeah. Like super hick.
Yeah. Okay. And he is really struggling a lot through the novel of the death of his father, who was on the ship when it blew. Because the 4 of them were the only survivors of, I don't even think they had a full number, but I'm guessing it was thousands, or at least 8,000 people.
It seems like a big-ish ship. I don't know if it was it really that many? I don't
Maybe I'm
know.
Wrong. I thought it was like a luxury cruiser.
I think it was like it was a political ship, right? So it could have been anywhere. With
are you picturing a Naboobian size then?
Yeah, I'm picturing something like that, like 100 people, maybe tops, something around there.
Because I'd picture something quite a bit larger.
It could have been. I'm totally just going off my guess here because it was at the beginning of the book now.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like it really matters.
Not important.
Everybody
not
died
important.
with them.
Right. Yeah, not super important, but so that's pretty much his character.
And the final character was Avon. Am I getting that right? Yeah, Avon. And she was a mechanic, she's quite young. I think she's 14, and she seems to have a knowledge of a full engineer, can take apart anything and rebuild it sort of person.
Yeah.
Her mother is another diplomat as well. What was she? She's the leader of one of the planets. I can't remember what planet it was.
She was a senator?
She was a senator, I think.
Yeah. I totally forget which one it was now.
Anyway.
Was it, I'm remembering it. It was it Hosnian Prime? I think it was Hosnian Prime.
No, her mom was always at Hosnian Prime instead of at their home world.
Yeah.
Yeah, they had like it seems to be an outer rim planet of some sort because their family lives in a palace on the planet that has a shield generator, and she turns it off. And then pirates kidnap her because she's chasing butterflies.
Oh man!
Yeah, so turn it off. Anyway,
I forget exactly which planet, but I found it interesting though that Hosnian Prime was name dropped quite a few times, and that's of course known as
it felt so much like trying to like cram in the sequel trilogy to me.
Right.
We need to make this planet relevant because it blew up and no one knew what it was.
Yeah. Yeah, for everyone who doesn't know who Hosnian Prime is, that's the planet that blew up in The Force Awakens, known as the capital for the Republic at the time of the rise of the First Order.
It's basically the B-movie version of Coruscant.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know why it's a hub for her to go. Maybe she was I forget what she was a senator for. I wish I remembered that now. But
yeah, I mean it's a different time zone as well, so it might have something to do with that planet as well. I mean Coruscant, I think is still the hub, but maybe at this point there's like separate senates, different planets or something. I don't know. This is a guess. This is not in a book anywhere.
Right.
Yeah, because she was staying on that planet and. Avon, because she kept getting into trouble after she was captured by the pirates and rescued by her uncle. Her mom forced her to live on Hosnian Prime with her, and then she just kept getting in trouble intentionally because she didn't want to be there. Till her mom sent her out to the outskirts in exile. Essentially, at least that's her perspective on it, which is where we meet her, and she is there with Vernestra, and Vernestra's. I guess it's another Jedi that she works with because it wasn't her master. I forget who the name was. It was only at the very beginning.
Yep. And we have J6, who is
Avron's droid. Yeah.
Avon's droid.
She's a battle droid that's been reprogrammed to be a nanny.
That's a little odd, but yeah.
I know, right? Yeah. Well, she describes it as her mom was overprotective of her.
Right, so that's all the characters.
There's a little bit more to J6 though we should share, and that's okay. Avon has actually modified her programming to be more self-aware and self-learning, and added scripts to her code to self-code. So she's
that's right. Yeah,
so she changes over the storyline where she kind of starts at the beginning, where she's just a very typical. I'm going to say 3PO-esque, but very kind of rigid sort of character. And then towards the end, she is she was described in the book a certain way. How would you call it?
I can't remember. It was she kind of
moody. It was like a very moody droid, and
she kind of reminded me of like a female, less violent version of Mr. Bones or something like that.
Mr. Bones was always very excited.
Yeah,
she was kind of more like, "Don't talk to me. Why are you talking to me?"
Just like really. Oh, you know what? It reminds me of like L3 from Solo. Maybe
I caught vibes of L3 as well.
Yeah, maybe that's more like.
That's probably the best way to describe it. In a very L3 like way.
L3 like
like, do it yourself.
Yeah, right. Don't look at me while I'm performing. I don't know why they had that in the movie. It just didn't need to do that.
Just because it's
So
funny.
yeah. All right. So some annotations here. So one from the beginning of the book, chapter 1. Starlight Beacon had been under construction for as long as Vernestra could remember. So to think that this is smaller than the Death Star. And took over 20 years to finish, really is an ambitious project for Palpatine to do. But I mean, Vernestra being 15, I'm assuming it took almost just as long for this thing to be constructed, and
and there's less technology here too, right?
That's true. Well, hyperspace isn't the same, but
it's also they're also going to have less technology to create it and move stuff around because we already know they're limited. Hyperspace lanes, and they don't have thousands of Geonosian droids to do it.
That's true. Yeah,
Geonosians.
Wookiees, Geonosians, The Death Star was
slaves.
built on the backs of slaves, in which case this Starlight Beacon was not, and so it kind of goes to show just how effective the slave work was when it came to building this monstrosity.
And that raises a good point too, because this time it's a republic, right? So they have proper workers and unions and everything that comes with that versus
9 to 6 shifts.
An empire, and so a good comparison to that will be getting something done here in the West versus China, right?
Yeah.
Where here, like when you go to just build a bridge, it's probably going to be like 5 to 10 years. In China, they did construction of a bridge. I think it was like 3 days. It was crazy.
Jeez. That's insane, man.
Did all permits and everything, right?
Right. And worth ethics in general, right? So there was another one from chapter 4. Empath tests, Vernestra asked. The capacity to perceive the feelings of others was a rare Force ability, but these were marvelous times. And the Force empath sounds to me almost like a fairy power. I just watched the Winx saga on Netflix, and this is a cartoon going way back, and now turned into an adult live action show. And an empath is one of the fairy powers that you can feel other people's feelings,
emotions,
and I was like, man,
empathy,
all I could think about was these fairies. Like when they have this empath power, I was like,
whenever I use it, you see fairies floating around.
Yeah, exactly. Can you imagine, old Ben Kenobi? Luke, are you an empath?
They can tell because it's just fairies that follow them everywhere.
I don't know. I just thought it was funny.
Yeah, I mean, the power definitely led to an interesting kind of ending bit, which I thought was kind of neat that they went that way.
Right.
I don't know if you want to get into that or if you're saving it.
No, I'm not saving it. You can go right ahead.
Okay, well, with the loss of Honesty's father, later on when they were on planet side stranded, and they found out that it was the Nihil that actually did it, and they were on planet as well, Honesty was filled with a lot of rage, and Emery, being an empath, was picking up on that and actually decided to use that as fuel to try to prove himself and go out and attack the Nihil himself while the other 2 girls were sleeping. So he went out in rage and, towards dark side, sort of Jedi-esque, went out there. Yeah. Didn't go as well as he had planned, but ended up with a lot of repercussions afterwards between
him
and Vernestra.
He used it as like a source, right? Like as a
it's really funny because one thing I thought was really neat, because it wasn't his own rage in a typical Sith-like fashion. So if Honesty got less angry for whatever reason, got scared, got nervous, he would be less filled with rage, and then that would then lose the rage that Emery was using, and he would kind of lose focus in the strength that you would get from fighting in a Sith-like fashion.
All I could think about was Kylo Ren just just like beating his injury to get more angry.
That's a good point. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah,
but typical Sith, rage is power, right? Because you get strength from it, and fury and passion.
Yeah, so that was one thing that stuck out to me at the end, was you saw this young Jedi really struggling with the dark side, in this moment of seeking out justice in a revengeful way.
Yeah.
There was another one. The Force works in mysterious ways, but part of being a Jedi is trusting the Force even when it's difficult. And that was kind of the line that I guess to me reflected a lot about the title of the book, and just about kind of the Jedi way in general. It's like they are supposed to trust in the Force even when times are tough, and it's something I think that as time goes by and the dark side has a hold on their vision to see to see through the Force kind of thing. They start to doubt themselves, and that's how we're in this moment of the High Republic where the Sith are not the villain. Yeah. And this is the golden age, right? The golden age of the Jedi. And so we see from this moment, it'll go downhill. And we're going to go downhill until we get to the Phantom Menace. And the Phantom Menace, until Revenge of the Sith, is even more of a sharp downhill. So as we read these books and go forward through the High Republic, it's worth remembering that as we go along, the story's going to get darker. And like the Jedi are going to suffer more challenges, right? Yeah.
To kind of go with what you're saying, because it's still early and we're on the kind of the golden age side of it. After Imri has this issue with the dark side, and Vernestra's all concerned about it, and is worried that he's going to turn into like a Sith, like the Jedi of old. And they bring it up with. She brings it up with, I think it's Skier at the end. Mm-hmm. And he says, "Oh yeah, that happens to most Jedi. Like they'll have a moment in their life will actually come into contact with the dark side, or something they'll get a taste of it, and then from then on, it's more or less just making the choice each and every day to do the right thing." And if you compare that to what happens in the actual prequel trilogy, when we're at kind of the darkest point of the Jedi Order, they're just absolutely terrified of it. And I'm sure if this had happened at that time, they probably would have kicked him out of the Order, to be honest. Yeah. Been like, no, you're too much of a risk. We can't train you. You're released.
No, that's a good point. It's a really good point.
It's just crazy to see the difference, because in this time I'm like, everyone comes to contact, but it's all about, knowing your purpose and making the right decision. So it doesn't matter. This happens to everyone.
Right. It's a little more of a normal thing for them to accept that the dark side is a thing in amongst the balance of being a Jedi, right? And by the time of the Jedi and the prequels, like they're afraid, of what the dark side can do, right?
They want no contact with it whatsoever. If that happens, then they think they've already lost, essentially.
And that's honestly the best way to put it, honestly, the way that you just put it, because there's an episode arc in the Clone Wars where Yoda is learning the path to immortality. And the Force priestesses are these characters that kind of guide him amongst Qui-Gon Jinn, as well as helping him out, taking him to different places across the galaxy to pass these tests, right? And there's one test that is always very visually cool as well. He has to fight himself in this very shadowy, dark form. Yeah. And it's the dark side in Yoda that he never acknowledged was there. And he just denies that it's inside of him, regardless whether he makes those choices or not. He chooses not to acknowledge the fact that there is this temptation or darkness in anybody, right? And that's one thing that really sticks out to me about the Jedi of that time, is that they become so ignorant with like seeing the dark side as an actual opponent, and some
dogmatic about it.
Right, yeah, and so it's cool to see 200 years before that just how they respond to these moments, right?
They're a lot more open-minded, yeah.
So there's one in chapter 12, little line there. It says, because her light whip was more than it seemed, because her lightsaber was more than it seemed, it was actually a light whip. So we already talked about the light whip very, very briefly. Yeah. But just to get into it a little more, there was a few more sections that I highlighted. Light whips are used by Night Sisters. And during the Sith Wars, the Jedi also used light whips as self-defense weapons.
I wrote down the same thing.
Yeah.
you left out they use it as self-defense specifically against the Sith who trained in more aggressive combat forms.
Yeah, more aggressive combat forms. Yeah. So I thought that was very interesting.
I thought so too. I'm curious. I'm trying to remember, thinking back to the Clone Wars, do we ever see them use light whips?
No, so the light whip specifically is different than an electro whip. So a light whip is a lightsaber. Like it is a lightsaber, but the blade is flexible and rope like.
Yeah, it was in the EU. I do remember that much.
Yeah, I think the only person who had an actual light whip was a character called Lumaya, but I have her Star Wars miniature actually, but I forget if that was a light whip or if that was still considered an electro whip. But I think it was a light whip. But anyway, yeah, we have seen electro whips. The Zygerian slavers carry electro whips, which are the orange whip-like things. Yeah, and they can combat a lightsaber, but they can't slice through things like a lightsaber would. Whereas a lightsaber slices through the same way any lightsaber would, just cleaves right through things. So it's a very dangerous weapon for them to wield.
Super dangerous. Yeah. I'm just trying to think. I'm sure you and probably everyone listening at some point has grabbed some sort of whip-like thing, just like a cable, and try to just pretend to be Indiana Jones and just whip yourself in the hand or wherever. Just
in the head or in the arm. Or yeah. Snap.
Yeah, it's funny because then even in the prequel Indiana Jones, it was like a prequel scene.
Flashback.
Yeah, the flashback. Indy does the exact same thing.
Yeah, gets the scar on his chin, which is a scar that Harrison has, and then they just decided to make it a story.
Why not?
So
that's funny.
That was very cool.
Maybe that's the actual canon of Harrison Ford.
Speaking of Indiana Jones, all right, this is going to drive me nuts. This has been driving me nuts for a while now, a couple of days. But speaking of Indiana Jones, I did not know that Temple of Doom is chronologically the first one that you watch.
Yeah, I didn't know that either until I read your tweets.
I didn't know that, man. I was blown away. I was blown away because it was made after the Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah.
So I always thought that it just naturally, was the next one in the line. But I guess, very George Lucas fashion, like, let's make a prequel.
And not tell anyone it's a prequel. Sounds like the first 3 seasons of Clone Wars.
It's just so funny.
Released in random order.
Yeah.
George does it a lot, actually. That's kind of annoying.
He does. He's got with Clone Wars, with the Star Wars films, Indiana Jones. They're all out of order, man. All of them.
They'll figure it out.
No, they'll figure it out. They got the internet now. So chapter 20, there was one more thing I highlighted. The Force naturally bent towards justice while in balance. And those pirates would have gotten away with their misdeeds if it hadn't been for the giant rock destroying half their ship. So I just thought that one little piece was interesting, that the Force naturally bends toward justice while in balance. Because, of course, it's a conversation that could go on a long time about, balance of the Force and all that stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
This is the first sentence in a Star Wars novel that I've read, which acknowledges the fact that the Force naturally does bend towards the light, in a matter of form, like in the matter of justice, right?
It's interesting because I always described as like a gray. You're trying to go for the middle, equal light and dark.
Right. I guess if you were to break it down into the judicial system, you have crimes and things that are fine. And if you have the Force, which is more or less like the judge in this analogy, you have the Force ruling on the side of justice, which would imply that there's things on the dark side of the Force that it would consider the Force itself would consider evil and not to be tampered, not to be used, right? So you have those two sides of the Force, but the light is the one that's meant to be coming out on top.
But then let me ask you this then, why was the balance that was so revered in the prequel trilogy, why was it the death of the Jedi and bringing balance to both the light and the dark?
Right. And I think I think the Jedi are just victims of Anakin's terrible choices, right? Like they're just there as one of the casualties and one of the consequences. That's a key word there, is consequence, for the choices and the actions that he took in a selfish manner for his own gain, for trying to keep the one person in his life that he loved, that he cared about. The best way I think that I try to look at it is you have this boy who's gone through so much pain and suffering. He starts off as this cheery little boy and he turns into this monster willing to do anything for the person that he loves because he's so afraid to lose her. And that's something that it's like a possessive kind of love, right? A really bad kind of love to have because it's not unconditional. And so he's willing to go as far as anything, killing children, just to gain any level of power to keep that love in his life, because he's so afraid to lose it. And fear leads to anger, and anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering, right? And so that's the whole thing where George adds in this mentality of like, you have to keep the force in balance. How many things in a day that we do that is considered evil? How many things that we do are considered good? And the force works on the side of justice, towards the light side of the force, because it's there, because we are supposed to be good, because keeping balance isn't necessarily about keeping both of those things in our life. Keeping balance means getting rid of the things that will come after us via temptation, right? Via greed, all these things that come after us that we don't want to feel, but we feel anyways. And it's these things that come into our lives that we then have to say no to, right? And that's what the balance is all about. That's because inevitably we all have these things, right? And Anakin is the perfect example of that. Anakin has to say no to these visions in the Force of Padme dying. And he can't live with himself if he loses her, right? So he goes out of his way to try and obtain this power to prevent that from happening. But in typical Shakespearean Macbeth style fashion, he causes that thing to happen by trying his absolute best to prevent it from happening in the first place. And so he inevitably causes that whole wheel to start turning. And the balance is now completely out of place. And so it's not until years later, where that seed of the light that's still in him that Padme knows is there, he sees his son, and it's his unconditional love for Luke Skywalker, his only son, that allows him to be redeemed and allows him to come back from the dark side of the Force to the light side of the Force, causing balance to be restored. And this justice element really plays into that, because as soon as balance is restored within Anakin Skywalker, he kills Palpatine, he kills the Emperor, who's the villain of the story and the one who's causing all this evil to happen in the galaxy. And so he throws him down the tube and kills him, and balance is then restored for the galaxy at large, because the one who is bringing all this evil is now gone, is now dead, right? Until of course they bring it back. But yeah, that is the whole concept, the whole idea, and that's how justice plays into this whole thing. And the Force, the reason why it fights on the side of justice, on the side of the light side, is because evil is the unnatural thing in this universe. And in Star Wars, it's no different. Evil is not supposed to be there. Evil is not supposed to happen. And just like in our real world, like evil was a choice. Evil was a option, given as an option to allow free will. And so the balance really is all about saying no to that other option, to the easy way out, to the easy path, and about making the right choice, and about making the choice that would agree on the side of justice, which would be on the side of the Force. So this line really stuck out to me as being a very prominent sort of defining one sentence that really reflects the allegiance of the Force itself, and how the Force itself works towards the light and not towards the darkness, even though that side of the Force is there.
Oh, for a second, I thought I was listening to Dave Filoni. Overall balance, though, one thing that I actually thought was pretty cool, but also a little rehashed. I don't know if you noticed, but I was going to bring it up, see if you did. The planet they land on, the ecosystem of how there's like the acidic rains that happen throughout the night. So towards dusk, the acid rains come in and they just destroy everything. They just burn away all the undergrowth. These trees are able to stay because they have this special wax, and the animals and stuff will hide in the trees, but everything else is just dissolved. And then over the night, it just pours rain and everything is barren. And then in the morning, everything regrows very quickly, centimeters per second, coming back to be back for the entire day, and then night cycle continues on again. That also was described in the book as balance of both dark and light, and that
Mortis.
Yeah, I'll say this is directly out of the Mortis trilogy from Clone Wars, which is exactly how the Mortis planet works, with the dark side and light side of the Force as well, between the brother and the daughter.
When the night comes, like everything just dies, and then in the morning it
withers.
Comes back to life again. Yeah. I thought that was really cool. Actually, I liked that part of the moon that they were on was a cool attribute. So overall, what do we think of this book? I mean, it's a junior novel. It's nothing crazy, but definitely not the worst Star Wars book I've ever read, honestly.
It's not Star Wars Battlefront, that's for sure.
No, it's not Star Wars Battlefront. If anyone's listening, Blake and I have had a difficult time processing Battlefront, the Star Wars novel by Alexander Freed, which both of us, the first one, the second one was actually awesome. Written by Christy Golden. The second one was fantastic, but yeah, the first one was just atrocious. It was tough. It was just terrible.
I'm sure the fans who've been constantly listening to the show are tired of us ragging on it by now. But to me, that's the bar of the Star Wars books that it's so hard to get through. It's a struggle, and I'd rather not be reading it.
Right. It's a 1-star book. The only reason why it gets 1 star is because it's got some interesting facts in there that might play into the overall story at large.
Yeah.
But that's the only thing, right? There's other 1-star books I've read, but I'm not going to go on and list them all. This one's pretty good. What are we going to rate it out of 5 big Fortuna stars? out of 5 big Fortuna
Pablos, 5 Pablos.
Oh, 5 Pablo points. Right. Pablo points. So how many Pablo points do we rate this book?
Because the story actually, to me, was relatively interesting, I didn't feel like reading it was a chore exactly, which to me, a lot of Star Wars books is actually pretty high praise, because I find majority of them are less interesting than I'd like them to be, at least over the last few years. So I'm somewhere between like 3.5 and 4. I probably think
that's
3.5
exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah, like I wouldn't probably read it again, but I don't feel like I wasted my time.
Right. Yeah. It's a Star Wars story. It's just like, all right, cool. I was about to say the exact same thing. I think 3.5 stars for me. 3.5 Pablo points.
3.5 Pablo points.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. And here's a good way to actually kind of figure out my rating system. And that's just my personal opinion. I mean, I'm not kind of saying this is a 3.5 star book, read or don't read it, whether or not you're bet. Yeah. If you're curious about the book, go read it. But for me, I was like, I enjoyed it, and it was good. 5 stars for me is a favorite book. All right. That, like, you can't get 5 stars or 5 Pablo points with me unless it's now hit my all-time favorite list of Star Wars books, right? Which is very hard to do. On there is a total of 2 Star Wars books. It's Darth Plagueis and Dark Disciple. It's very hard to crack that list.
There's one more that you thought was super good.
4 stars for me is like Light of the Jedi. Really good creative Star Wars writing. That's like it's up there with the best, among the best Star Wars books. 3 stars for me is like, it was good. It was. Yeah, I read once, I enjoyed it, moving on, kind of thing, and all seeing that both you and I kind of had struggles with the beginning half. I think 3 stars is fair for me.
I feel like the writer got notes halfway in, and she changed how she was writing. She kept doing this thing. It was only in the first half, and it really, really annoyed me, where she would start a sentence and then break with like dashes, and then talk about something else entirely different, and then break with dashes back into the first part of the sentence. And that happened a lot, and it stood out to me. I just didn't like it at all. And by the time we got a third of the way into the book, it just stopped happening.
Like just someone's thoughts like jutting into what they were saying. And then
it was really awkward, and it kept taking me out of the book, and I just
awkward to
disliked
read
it a lot. And when that kept happening, I'm like, I was really thinking that the whole book was going to be a struggle. Thankfully, it stopped. I really disliked that.
Yeah. So anything between 3 and 3.5 Pablo points, I think, is good placing. So yeah, we're on the same page there. So I looked up that information that I needed, and I got it. So the next couple Star Wars High Republic books we got on the radar, we still have Claudia Gray's Into the Dark to get through, which we're going to do in the next couple weeks, which is the third book, and I believe, I don't know if it's following the events of the Starlight Beacon creation or if it's also overlapping. Would not be surprised at this point if it was. Yeah, I don't know much about it yet. We're gonna read that soon, but yeah, that's the only other book in the High Republic series so far that is, an actual novel and not an adaptation, like the Great Rescue or whatever. But the next junior novel, written by Daniel Jose Older, as I mentioned before, Race to Crash Point Tower, releases June 29th. 2021, so quite a ways away. I don't know anything else about it. And the first chapter of the book is in the back of A Test of Courage. Another book, which is written by Cavan Scott, which is the second, or I think it's one of the Del Rey novels, I believe. Possibly. It's a Del Rey novel, launching June 29th. So same day as Race to Crash Point Tower. And it's called The Rising Storm. And that is supposedly supposed to be somewhat of a direct continuation, I think, of where we left off with Light of the Jedi and some of the characters there. So I guess we'll see what happens with that. So those two are also kind of on the radar.
So stuff to look forward to then.
Yeah, something for summer, So until then, we got one more.
Yeah, and I just realized I got 3 more notes.
Oh, go for it.
Even though you're wrapping up, and we've already rated the book, so we have to unrate it because this might change your opinion.
All right, go ahead.
Just some notes of more or less stuff that might come up in the future. It's when we find out that Avon's father left when she was quite young. He actually left the family to map hyperspace lanes. So this seems to be very much a reoccurring plot point.
Yeah,
happened a lot in the previous novel.
Right, because it was revealed that the Santeca families.
That's right.
That's what they do. Hyperspace prospectors is the job title.
That name. Yeah. So apparently her father left to do that. So at some point we might come across him, or who knows, because her mom thinks that he got lost some planet, some distant galaxy, and we'll never see him again, some solar system, sorry. The next thing I noticed that this was a story point that kind of irked me, actually. It was during the duel between Imri. We didn't talk about this at all.
Oh, actually, we didn't. No. That's okay.
Yeah, so we kind of skipped over the point where there's actually a duel between Imri while he's kind of anger or rage possessed against Vernestra, and he starts choking out one of the Nihil, the girl, and Vernestra just grabs him with the force and chucks him over the ship and into the distance, and that really bothered me because it just doesn't fit anything we've seen in Star Wars, at least on film. It was very comical. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah, to me, it was kind of lore breaking. I didn't like that. I thought it was too strong.
Doesn't she also dismantle the lightsaber? Doesn't she cut his lightsaber?
She does. In pieces? Yes. Yeah. So she disarms him. She switches her lightsaber to whip mode, and during the duel, and she gets his wrist or just kind of slashes him. Not a full cut, but he, in panic, drops the lightsaber, and then as he goes to get it, she lowers the whip down and cuts his lightsaber in half.
Right.
And that actually leads into the next point, which is that Avon has been her sciencey self has been very interested in trying to figure out how lightsabers work, and she wants to research that, and thinking that her research will then get her into a really high university on one of the prime planets and get her out of the outer rim. And so she actually collects the broken lightsaber parts and is planning on researching into it. And I'm curious what you think what
This stuck
she'll
out to
do
me.
from that, and what is missing with lightsabers of that era versus what we know in the prequels.
This stuck out to me because there was a conversation that character had with one of the other characters, and he was what's the guy's name again?
Emery or Honesty?
It was Emery. It was Emery was talking to the mechanic.
Yeah, that's Avon.
Yeah, Avon. And he was explaining about the components of his lightsaber and how the focusing lens works its way into the whole thing. And he explained that without the focusing lens, it would just be a never-ending beam of energy. And I was like, okay, well we've got some sort of hint there. It's like, okay, that's kind of what the Death Star is. And now we've got this mechanic who's interested in playing around with this tech and as from a young age, and being 200 years before the prequels, the ability to have a super weapon by the time that the plans are developed for Attack of the Clones. We're only 200 years away from, well, 210 years or away from that moment, right? So it makes me wonder whether or not that'll play into this whole super weapon based on kyber crystals concept, right?
So you think that perhaps she does the research that then leads to the Death Star?
I think it's planting seeds. Yeah, I think it could be. I think it could be planting seeds. Another thing that stuck out to me out of the things that you mentioned was actually this came up a little earlier. It was about the light whip, but specifically about how the Force called her to make that weapon, and that it was pointed out that the light whip was used in the ancient wars between the Jedi as self-defense weapons against the Sith's more aggressive fighting tactics.
Stances,
They didn't go into detail what that was, but it made me think is like, oh, these Nihil people are ruthless, right? Like they're supposed to be insanely dangerous of many kinds.
They have no
They have no ethics, no code.
They have no self-preservation either. So that you can't predict what they're going to do because they're like semi-suicidal. They don't care about each other. They'll do whatever it takes to win, right?
Yeah. So it made me wonder. I wonder if maybe this weapon will come in handy later, in a moment of time where she does face off against some sort of something. That a lightsaber might not be as effective as a light whip could be, which I don't really know. But I mean, that's what good storytellers are for. Like they'll come up with something. But it made me think like, oh, they actually made an effort to make it clear like this is, for a specific purpose, as far as fending off more aggressive fighting tactics. So maybe, I mean, with this new villain on the rise being a very vicious kind of villain, they've made,
and he has a lightsaber
clear.
now.
The lead guy has a lightsaber now. Yeah,
the leader of the Nihil.
Marchion Ro. Yeah, the eye. So he's got the Jedi's lightsaber now. So it made me think. It's like, oh well, I don't know when these characters are all going to converge, and maybe some of them will pop out into the more adult novels and stuff here and there. But it's interesting to think, okay, we got a light whip now, like in one of the characters' hands. Like this could play a key moment later on in one of the Del Rey books or something. Yeah, and that's one of the coolest things about an interweaving story narrative, kind of like how we're going through these High Republic books. Like they're all connected and they're all geared towards different age groups, but they're all telling this general block of story at the same time. And all these writers who are making all these different types of books sat in the same room together to do that, right? So they're always collaborating with each other. And from some of the launch event videos that we watched and listened to and stuff like that, it's been made clear to me that they've been helping each other write each other's stories.
Yeah, they've definitely been bouncing ideas off each other. And this is part of the interview I recall. They actually will specifically ask, like if they're looking for a character that'll do X, Y, Z, they'll ask each other if anyone else has a character that's already been made that would fit that position. And then they'll use that character to get everything to be more interwoven. Yeah. That's probably why Skier's at the end of this book, honestly.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. And Skier is now one of the focus characters in the Marvel Comics series, which has been pretty interesting, I think, to read through. We only have 2 issues so far, but third one's coming out, I think this week. I think it came out last week actually. So I'll have to grab that. But anyway, that's pretty much all I got for today. If you had any last things to bring up, or is that it?
I'm really excited. I think I said this last time we talked about the previous book, but I'm really excited to get more into the Nihil. To me, they're just a really interesting group of characters. So I think I've mentioned this briefly. I was kind of let down that there wasn't more. I thought they opened the first like 3 chapters, I think, are all about the one Nihil woman. And then, like I said, we never really talked or read anything about her again until the ending. But I really thought she was going to be more prominent throughout the entire book. So that was disappointing. So I'm looking more forward to novels specifically around them, because they're just like really cool pirates.
Right.
I know that you don't like being called pirates. We're more than that. We're not here.
Yeah. For the eye. All right, guys, thanks so much for tuning in. And of course, as usual, please drop a solid rating and a review if you have the time. That would really help us out. It's all to do with the algorithms of getting found under search results and this and that. So that, and of course, word of mouth. If you can, just throw up a tweet or a Facebook post of your favorite episode, or perhaps even the one that you listened to this week, or the one that you discovered the show with, and sharing it with a friend, of course, as usual, helps us out a lot. Word of mouth is really the best way to spread our audience, and it's a non-profit show, so it's worth mentioning that any donations you might give to us, please just give it to World Vision instead, where they can use it towards people who actually need the money. So thanks again for that, if you do end up going for that. And at the very end, I've got a clip of George Lucas talking about the Force. It's an old interview that I go back to from time to time, just to kind of catch up on exactly how he details these things out. But Dave Filoni's in that round table room, and it's the writers of the Clone Wars, I believe, that George is explaining the Force to. And I always found it a very interesting little audio clip. It's on YouTube as well if you want to check it out. But stay tuned on the show, guys. We got lots of cool stuff coming up, as well as more of our What Happened episodes, covering characters like Ahsoka and Bo-Katan. And hopefully you guys enjoyed the Darth Maul one that dropped, because we're catching you guys up on all these great characters. So until next time, we'll see you right here again on Star Wars Escape Pod. May the Force be with you.
Vader was seduced by the dark side of the Force.
The Force?
And the Force is what gives the Jedi his power.
Found in all living things, found as flows from us, controls individuals, yet we have free will. We have a destiny if we want to follow it. We live for a reason and must discover what it is. It looks like it was done when I started episode 1.
Oh, okay.
Because it looks like it's referring to episode 1. And a lot of this, like this thing about the Force, in all living things that surround us, is really just a capsule of what was said in episode 5.
Life creates it, makes it grow. Its energy surrounds us and binds us.
The core of the Force. I mean, you got the dark side, the light side. One is selfless, one is selfish. And you want to keep them in balance. What happens when you go to the dark side is it goes out of balance, and then you get really selfish and you forget about everybody, and you ultimately lead yourself, because when you get selfish, you get stuff, or you want stuff. And when you want stuff and you get stuff, then you are afraid somebody's going to take it away from you, whether it's a person or a thing or a particular pleasure, experience. Once you become afraid that somebody's going to take it away from you, or you're going to lose it, then you start to become angry, especially if you're losing it. And that anger leads to hate. And hate leads to suffering. Mostly on the part of the person who's selfish, because you spend all your time being afraid of losing everything you've got, instead of actually living. Where joy, by giving to other people, you can't think about yourself, and therefore there's no pain. But the pleasure factor of greed and of selfishness is a short-lived experience. Therefore, you're constantly trying to replenish it. But of course, the more you replenish it, the harder it is to, so you have to keep upping the ante. You're actually afraid of the pain of not having the joy. So that is ultimately the core of the whole dark side, light side of the Force. And everything flows from that. Obviously, the Sith are always unhappy because they never get enough of anything they want. Mostly their selfishness centers around power and control. And the struggle is always to be able to let go of all that stuff. And of course, that's the problem with Anakin ultimately is you're allowed to love people, but you're not allowed to possess them. And what he did is that he, fell in love and then married her and then became jealous. And then he saw in his visions that she was going to die. He couldn't stand losing her. So in order to not lose her, he made a pact with the devil to be able to become all-powerful.
I am becoming more powerful than any Jedi has ever dreamed of, and I'm doing it for you.
But of course, when he did that, she didn't want to have anything to do with him anymore. So he lost her.
Anakin, you're breaking my heart.
Once you were powerful, being able to bring her back from the dead, well, if I can do that, then I can be Emperor of the Universe. I can get rid of the Emperor. I can do everything. I can make everything the way I want it.
And together, you and I can rule the galaxy. Make things the way we want them to be.
And once you do that, you'll never be satiated. You're always going to be consumed with this driving desire to have more stuff and be afraid that others are going to take it away from you. And of course they are. Because every time you get two Sith together, you have the master, you have the apprentice, and the apprentice is always trying to recruit another apprentice to join with him to kill the master.
Luke, you can destroy the Emperor. He has foreseen this. It is your destiny. Join me, and together we can rule the galaxy as father and son.
And the master knows that he's basically everybody below him wants his job.
Your hate has made you powerful. Now, fulfill your destiny and take your father's place at my side.
The only way to overcome the dark side is through discipline. The dark side is pleasure, biological, and temporary, and easy to achieve. The light side is joy, everlasting, and difficult to achieve. The great challenge must overcome laziness, give up quick pleasures, and overcome fear, which leads to hate. Amen. Now let us pray.
Remember, the Force will be with you, always.